So what is going on right now in Maui post-fires?
No one is rebuilding homes yet. The remediation effort is still underway. And the biggest challenge for the families who were directly impacted by that, who were left homeless, is the fact that they still don't have anywhere to go. They've been put up in Airbnbs or in hotel rooms for a period of time. On Maui, the hotels are like, hey, we need to be able to start welcoming in tourists back into the island. And so the governor is trying to work out a plan to be able to provide some form of semi-permanent housing for people. If they were to try to go out and rent a house on the market, it is purely unaffordable. And there are a number of families who are now faced with the tough decision of, do we just pick up and go and move our life out of Hawaii and to the mainland? Which is heartbreaking, given how many of those families, they've been in that community in West Maui or in Lahaina for generations.
What is happening with the people that had mortgages? So if they had a mortgage and their home was burnt down and they haven't gotten money from the insurance company and they haven't been able to rebuild, do they still have to pay that mortgage while this is all going on?
I haven't heard that raised as an issue. I would hope that the mortgage company would recognize what's going on, but that's a good question. I haven't heard it raised as an issue from either residents or as part of the conversation around housing for them.
Why has no one been able to rebuild?
There has to be. There are so many layers of toxins in the ground that have to be cleaned up and removed before people can go in and actually start to rebuild. But to speak of just the inspection and the permitting process and so forth.
So the layers of toxins just from the fire?
From the fire, and you had like a gas station with underground fuel tanks that burned like completely to ash on the ground. The toxins that came from all, different construction and everything else that exists in the environment.
So all that stuff burns. It gets in the soil. It gets rained on. So the ground is contaminated.
Right.
And this is the reason why they can't rebuild?
Yeah. And they knew from the outset it was a known fact that it would take, if it only takes a year, that is an expedited timeline, is what I've been told.
How long has it been now?
August will be 1 year. August 8th.
The most insulting thing was the $700 one-time payment from the government. That is, who said yes to that? Who allowed that? And at the same time, releasing this number where they accidentally had sent Ukraine $6 billion. Remember that?
Yeah, they said, oh, well, we lost track of this $6 billion. And so now that we've found it because of some accounting error, now we can go and send it to Ukraine.
And they were automatically assuming they were going to send that anyway.
Of
we're
course.
going to be sending more.
Of course.
But no consideration at all.
No, I remember specifically when the fires had just happened, the White House brought in the director of FEMA to talk to the White House press corps. And someone asked the question, what are you, FEMA, what are you actually doing for the people who've been impacted by this tragedy? And the director stood there with a straight face and proudly said, well, we have provided a one-time payment of $700 to everyone who has been impacted by this fire, displaced by this fire. And that was her big announcement that she was there to make. One single one-time payment of $700.
So that means you have 700 servings of ramen.
Basically, you can't even rent a bedroom in someone's house for $700. It's
certainly you can't for 8 months.
No,
that's what's crazy.
No,
$700 is so crazy. It's just such an insulting and ridiculous number, and the fact that they haven't given more. It's like, but yet they're flying people around on airplanes that come in illegally through the border?
Yeah.
Just like, how much does that cost?
Yeah, exactly.
What does that program cost?
Exactly.
Like, what does that cost?
Multi-billions of dollars, if I had to guess. It's, FEMA has other services. It's a lot of bureaucracy. It's a lot of paperwork. And residents on Maui, they were being told, like, okay, well, hey, if you accept this kind of aid from FEMA, you are ceding some sense of your sovereignty or decision-making ability with regard to your land or your property, and all of the red tape essentially that caused a community who were rightfully skeptical about government coming in and saying, okay, well, we're going to help you, when that same government said, oh yeah, hey, we may at that time, and the governor said this, and then he corrected himself later on, but he's like, oh yeah, we're thinking about and talking about how we can turn this entire place, have the government take ownership of it and turn it into some kind of memorial or some kind of workforce housing, which obviously made people really freaking mad to say like, well, who the hell are you to come in here and say you're just going to take our land? You're just going to take it and do what you want with it? So they're obviously very skeptical and rightfully so about, the fine print. What does it mean if I accept a few bucks here or there from the federal government? What power am I ceding to you to determine my future, the future of my family and our home?
And unfortunately, the rest of the country has forgotten about it.
By and large, yeah.
Yeah, there's always a new thing in the news. There's always a new thing to pay attention to. There's always a new fear.
One of the things that has just recently come out, first of all, the Maui Police Department, they did an audit of what went wrong, what did we do wrong, what should we have done better, and kudos to them for actually doing this. And I think they came up with like 92 recommendations on things that needed to be fixed. They shared that with municipalities all across the country as like, hey, here are the hard lessons that we learned. You guys should take note and try to protect yourselves from having to go through what we went through. Other agencies at the county level and at the state level have not been so honest or transparent about their shortcomings. And the most egregious one recently that our local news in Hawaii exposed was the head of Maui's emergency response division. He was off island that day. He was at of all places, a FEMA conference on Oahu when the fires happened. And instead of doing what any compassionate and responsible person and leader would do, you immediately get on the first plane out. You get a notification there, this fire is happening on Maui. I got to be there with my people and I got to lead my teams to respond to this emergency. It took him a few days to go back to Maui, first of all. But the thing that was, and I don't know if you can find this, Jamie, but they released his text exchanges that he had with his assistant, who was telling him, he's like, what's going on with the fire? LOL. And the assistant responding saying, ha, 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 this place is like a circus. Their exchange was so disturbing, doesn't even put it lightly, when there are people who are being burned to ash, burned alive in their community, and their text exchange is like, oh, ha, 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 is the fire still going? LOL, yup, now it's going in another place. I couldn't believe it when I read it. And this was the same guy, Herman Andaya is his name. He didn't show up and show his face publicly until like 7 days after the fire. And then he went and he did one press conference and then he quit and resigned. But there has not yet, and I hope investigations are ongoing, there has not been any kind of accountability at the various failure points that existed in this response.
If the government wanted to take over that land, the best way to do it is to drag this out and make it so that people
exactly
quit.
Have no other choice.
They have nothing to do. They can't do anything, and then they just tell stories about it. We used to own that land.
Right. There's a Native Hawaiian leader, famous surfer, navigator for the Hokulea and traditional Hawaiian navigation, Archie Kalepa. He has been one of the most stalwart leaders for the community during this whole period in time, organizing emergency response and food and shelter and, community gatherings. People come and play music at the end of the day throughout this whole crisis period, and has been leading the charge. He's very well respected in the community in holding that line and saying we are not giving up our land. But as you said, it becomes a much more difficult argument to make when people, you got to live.
Yeah.
You got to be able to make sure your kids have what they need to go back to school and all of it. And how can you do that when you're in a constant state of transition with no real timeline, where they're not coming and saying, okay, hey, you can go and start rebuilding on this date.
Right. So they're going to have to do
some
some
sort of... to speak of the cost. I mean,
right.
Building a house from scratch.
Right. Crazy. Most people don't have that money.
No.
And then also like, how long is this cleanup going to take? And like When does it start? And what do they have to do? I mean,
it is ongoing. It is ongoing,
right?
but it is massive excavation, and
so it's ongoing.
It is ongoing.
Do they have an anticipated timeline?
I heard from one guy they were looking at, well, hopefully maybe it might be September, it might be October, but it's one of those things that one of the guys who's out there actually doing this is just saying, well, you don't know what you're going to deal with until you're actually dealing with it, and it might take longer, it might not take as long, but it's one of those things that they're not figuring out as they go, but they are being confronted with things as they go.
Is this one of those issues where you wish that maybe you still were in Congress?
Yeah.
Yeah, because at least you could be talking about it.
That was my hope, and I talked with leaders in Congress and people who I still know there, and just calling for oversight and accountability from the federal government, because we saw many points of failure, everything from the immediate response to the whole water issue and the fact that there wasn't any water coming through people's hoses during that time.
Now, why was that?
The history of water on Maui is complicated, and it's largely attributed to that, of the fact that the water is a privately owned utility, and how that water is controlled. There is limited use of water at different times, how it's controlled and where it goes. And there was a state water management official apparently who had some say in this, of saying, well, I don't think that we should turn the water on for this period of time because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But my point is, all of these things need to be very clearly investigated, because people's lives and property were absolutely destroyed because of this.
So was it because that water is a valuable commodity, they didn't allow it to be used by the people that were experiencing the fire?
There was some implication of I don't know. It was like, well, we want to make sure that the water is being distributed equitably. And so we don't want to give it to one group of people over another group of it. It really didn't make any sense what the argument was, but it was like, hey, you missed that critical juncture in that window because you were trying to ruminate. It was something to do with equity and some theoretical argument, rather than, this is a community in crisis. There are fires burning in various different places. We need to get water to people who need it.
There's also the thing about having above ground wires.
Yes.
Right? Which is crazy.
In
a place that experiences storms.
In a place that experiences storms, but also on West Maui is traditionally a drier part of the island that also experiences wildfires, even small ones on a regular basis, that if they're not immediately controlled, you end up with what happened.
This is so disheartening that it's not receiving more attention.
Yeah.
Check out my book, For Love of Country, for sale right now at tulsigabbard.com. And you can also order the audiobook that I narrated on Audible.